Yeah. Give me a short endorsed for my podcast called Woke by Accident. It is a weekly chat about social topics impacting the culture. Yeah. Give me a short endorsed for my podcast called Woke by Accident. It is a weekly chat about social topics impacting the culture.
Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Woke by Accident podcast, a weekly chat about socially conscious topics impacting the culture. Welcome. I am your host, Jen, and we have another great show for you today. Our title is Choose Your Circle Carefully, a Friend Would Never. So, we're inspired by back to school season. A lot of school districts are getting ready or have already welcomed students back for a great school year. And so it got me to thinking about friendships that young people have to deal with, and some recent news stories that have circled or centered around what happens when these friendships take a turn. So, what we want to do is talk about this topic. I'm no expert, I'm no therapist. It's just me kind of posing some food for thought in light of some recent news stories that have appeared before us in media, some documentaries about the subject. And so, we will share about this topic for today. So, as another fall school year begins, this is a reminder for parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles, mentors, coaches, educators, and anyone with a young person in their life to be mindful of who is influencing them, who they feel safe around, and what they may be carrying in silence. We spend a lot of time preparing young people for school, buying supplies, planning schedules, clothes, discussing grades, sporting events, activities, college, their future. But we also have to prepare them for relationships, friendships that can shape self esteem, decision making, safety, and sometimes even survival. So, we're talking about the kind of friendships that look normal on the outside, but may be rooted in something a little more deeper: jealousy, control, humiliation, peer pressure, betrayal, secrecy, or even silence. In light of news stories, which we mentioned, uh, Nolan Wells, Shanquella Robinson, the painful history revisited, and some recent documentaries based on true stories, a series on Hulu called Friends Like These, the murder of Skylar Niece, and the cyberbullying explored in the Netflix documentary Unknown Number, the high school catfish. This is not a conversation about blaming victims for trusting, okay? It is about a conversation about awareness, discernment, accountability, and teaching our young people that real friendship should never cost them their safety, their dignity, their voice, or their peace. So the before school is the school year is underway, before the parties, football games, sleepovers, group chat, road trips, and even new friend circles beginning, let's have this conversation. Who are our young people? Do they feel safe with these friends? Can they call home if something goes wrong? And what do you know? And what and do you know that you never have to stay where you do not feel respected, you're endangered, or made to feel small? So these are the things that we want our young people to know as we begin this school year. All right. So let's get into it. Let's see here. So we want to ask these questions. Ask them about their friendships. And this is some information that we did a little research on in reference to the news stories in these documentaries, which we recommend people check out. In the show notes, we'll note all of them listed, the ones that are documentaries. I had an opportunity to look at the one Unknown Number, the high school catfish, and Friends Like These, the murder of Skylar Niece. So those are definitely recommend checking those out. But here are some thoughts that we may want to pose to our young people. Who makes you feel safe? Who makes you feel anxious, pressured? Can you call your parent or someone, an adult you trust, if you need help with no questions asked? Is anyone bullying me, humiliating me, threatening, isolating, controlling you online or in person? Do you know you can leave any situation that does not feel right? Our young people need much more than supplies and schedules. They need trusted adults who will listen to them without judgment, recognize warning signs, and remind them that friendship should never require fear, silence, humiliation, or self abandonment. So in this episode, these things, definitely came to mind in light of stories that we've heard in the news, such as Nolan Wells, Shanquella Robinson, and the two documentaries that we mentioned. Okay. And this episode is being broadcast live on, let's see, YouTube and Facebook currently. The audio episode will be available soon. So we appreciate all the support. And please, a reminder for everyone to please subscribe and follow the podcast on the website or any of the streaming platforms, including YouTube, at our handle, which is Woke by Accident. On YouTube, and the website is wokebyaccident.com, where you can pull up any of the episodes and listen to them there. All right. So we want to be clear, the responsibility for violence, abuse, harassment, wrongdoing always belongs to the person or people who caused it. This conversation is is about the prevention. And actually, I want to put a photo up. This is, oh, hang on. Okay, so this is a little collage I made that has the topics that we're talking about: Nolan Wells, Shanquella Robinson, the Cabo Six, who were responsible for us losing Shanquella Robinson, unfortunately, Nolan Wells, and the young men who traveled with him, who were, friends at one point in time in his life. And then the documentary, Unknown Number, there, and then the other documentary is called Friends Like These on Hulu. There's another one called A Friend, a Murderer, on also on, I believe, Netflix. So that's another one you may want to look into. All right. So here are some talking points that we want to share for our conversation. A real friend does not need to be perfect, but they should not humiliate, isolate, intimidate, exploit, abandon, or endanger you. As I look back, in my younger years, um, you know, having friends, I didn't have a whole lot. I had, a small group of friends, but, I did, really feel feelings of wanting to, and it's probably going to sound very lame saying this in my big grown age, but I always wanted to be cool or be seen as cool, and so because bullying and they used to call it joning, I think some people call it ranking, was a real thing. And I can remember getting joned on for the littlest smallest things. And so, but if you were considered cool, people would leave you alone and they wouldn't bother you. So the moment that, but that cool only lives for a moment, right? So what is cool, it's really subjective. And so I hope, kids don't, go down that path of, trying to chase what's cool, because should be your own person and not be a follower. You should be a leader and not try to chase what's cool. I know that now. And I think at some point, as a young person, I, realize that I can't just be following who I think is cool, right? Because the totem pole is so, is always being raised. One minute you're cool because you did this, or you're cool because you broke this rule, and it's just like a never ending circle. And so that's why it's so important to be a leader and not a follower. And I had to learn that, luckily without any major detriment, but I can remember feelings of being humiliated, like I said, joning, cracking on each other. Riding the school bus was a big thing, and you went through it, you got through it. It wasn't the end of the world. But some people, don't have thick skin like that, right? And so it may be really, difficult to endure. So I want to, pivot and with that reflection. Um, that reflection, in my younger days, as we have this conversation about friendships, being a young person as the school year is about to appear before us. And so we're thinking about some of these news stories, documentaries about young people and friendships that made a turn. I do want to acknowledge the chat. We have JR Sparrow who made a comment. Welcome, JR. Thank you for tapping in. We appreciate the support and hope you are doing well. All right. JR says she always got to have the strap. Hopefully it won't come to that. I just look back. A friend is not a friend. You have to make that discernment. And sometimes it's a lot to ask of young people to make these big decisions, right? They have so much to deal with, trying to be on task and do a good job in school. Maybe they're in sports or cheerleading or some activities, all these things we put on young people and we expect them to just, do it and push on. And then, these other things are going on, so that's why we want to, be in tune with, our young people and have these conversations, not just about, what are you going to wear to the dance or the football games, but talk about these friendships, because at the center of all of these situations um, were, the relationships, right? The friendships. And at some point, it made a turn. At some point, it made a turn. So, as the responsible adults in the young people's lives, I'm encouraging that we, be in tune with the relationships that our young people have. Okay, let's keep going. So, first, we want to set the frame. Friendship is a safety issue, right? Make It's important to make the distinction between a casual acquaintance, a social media mutual, a party friend, or a true friend. Have these conversations about access and safety, right? How do your friends make you feel and things like that. We have a comment, JR, I measure my friends by how far I can stretch them. It's yeah, as an adult, we can do that, right? But is that something reasonable to ask a young person to do? To say, oh, this friend that you have, do you trust them? Do they make you feel safe? They may say, I guess, but do we really, is it fair to put that pressure on a young person? So I think to kind of break the ice so that it's not this big intense thing is to just kind of have those bite-sized conversations and see, hey, how did it go and who was there, and just let them vent, let them share, right? um yeah, and we have a comment from, actually, I can actually show this. I have a comment from JR. I mean, I live a dangerous life, so I need ride or dies. Yeah, ride or dies are hard to come by too, right? One minute you think someone is a friend, and then, they may, like I said, I always felt like I was chasing cool, right? Because the cool people didn't get joned on. That's what we used to call it. We used to call it Joan. But some people, call it ranking or whatever, but if you were cool, nobody bothered you. But if they didn't think you were cool, then, here come, I know you ain't talking, and here with your old blah, 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 blah. And it's just like it would come out of nowhere, and it's just like, whoa, and it just like daggers. It's just like, but it started as a lighthearted thing, and then sometimes, it would escalate. So, you know, growing pains, but obviously in these cases, some of these things that back in our day was not that big of a deal obviously becomes a really big deal, like in that documentary on Hulu, the With Friends Like This Who Needs Enemies. That one, these girls were the best of friends, right? And then to think, without giving something away, someone ends up losing their life, in this friend circle. So how does it get to here to there, right? Like something is seriously wrong in the relationship that, innocent girls who, had these great memories and times and things like that would, take a turn in that way. So we'll gloss over the news stories. So Nolan Wells, we talked about him on a prior episode. Unfortunately, sadly, found dead on Horns Island in Mississippi after a 4th of July boat trip with friends, right? So these people who he was with were supposed to be his friends. And there's, a lot of questions, obviously, that have not been answered, and an investigation going on. But it started with, friends going out for the weekend. How do we get there? You know, so it's just something you really, it just makes you sad, but it's also an opportunity to have conversations with young people, who may get ready to embark on, uh, football games and games and parades and all of the things that, we look forward to as a young person in a school year, right? Um, Also, Shanquella Robinson, we talked about this one in the past on who went on a friend's trip out of the country to Mexico in 2022 with friends, right? Six, they're known as the Cabo Six, these six individuals that she traveled with. And she did not return from this trip with friends, right? So, recent reports indicate the families were pursuing a wrongful death case, and that is still ongoing. No criminal charges have been brought. One of these people have changed their names, legally. It just seems like a lot of things were covered up from day one, misleading the parent with lies and things like that right from the beginning. So you just really wonder, um, were these really friends? And as I, did some diving into some true crime coverage on Shanquella Robinson, it seems like they weren't as tight. That entire six people friend group, we were not as tight as one may have thought. But, you still would think that, it wouldn't be a case where someone would end up losing their life, right? Oh, right. And then the next one is the Netflix documentary called Unknown Number, the high school catfish. And this is about a Michigan teen named Lauren Lakari and a young man, Owen, who were targeted with relentless harassment through anonymous messages. This is something that young people in our current age are dealing with, online bullying, right? Instagram messages, text messages, and sometimes it's just rapid fire messages with negative comments, right? So in this case, we're talking about the Unknown Number um, Netflix documentary that surrounded a Michigan teen named Lori Lakari. And so this was really big example of cyberbullying and what can come about from this. No one lost their life, luckily in this case, but someone did, do time, and don't want to give away the story, but it was someone unexpected, close to um, the person at the center of it, instigating the whole thing. And then that's the thing you have to think about with, having the conversation with the young people, is the people in your circle, are they positive? Are they uplifting you? Or are they, manipulating and keeping up drama and gossip? Those are the people that, may not have your best interests at heart, right? Okay, online cruelty is still cruelty even when it comes through a blocked number, a fake account, or group chat. So that was kind of the subject, or one of the major themes in that documentary, the online cruelty, and it surfaced itself in all these different ways. So, if this comes up, it's important to save the evidence, right? Screenshot dates, usernames, make note, and keep track of all that information because it can be helpful. I know sometimes you want to just delete it, but sometimes saving it may help, especially when it's time, to escalate the matter to the authorities. You want to keep these things, and this is things that can impact adults too. We can be the subject of bullying and cyber attacks too. All right. So conversations you'll want to have early. What does respect look like in your friendships, right? And this is something we can, talk about as adults. What who do you call when you're scared, you're stranded, you're embarrassed, you're in trouble? If a friend is being attacked, harassed, or left behind, what is your responsibility? Do you have a code word? Come and get me, any something that is safe between your group. So, I've read that it's important or a good idea for families to have a code word. I know I have one, even, in my family, if something is wrong, there's a secret code word, right? And so that's a good idea to have conversations about that with your young people. All right. So, some things to look for. This is some other information that we got some research on the topic. Look for withdrawal from family and friends. Look for feelings of fear of upsetting a particular friend group. It's teenagers, young people, sometimes they wear their heart on their sleeve, and it's really clear when they make something is a switch turns off, right? And they're withdrawn. You're able to tell if they're upset, if something's going on, when they're normally upbeat and talking, if their mood completely changed, something's going on. And so this is when you kind of want to dig deeper into that. All right, and some other good advice for safety. No one gets left behind. If a friend cannot safely travel, walk, swim, drive, or consent, the 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 friend group should get help and not abandon them, right? So that's a really good advice that we obtained here. And another one is a check-in system. Share itineraries. Share your location, lodging address, ride information, a two emergency contact before group trips or parties. So that's a good idea. Another one is to normalize rescue without punishment. A young person should be able to call home for help without fearing that the first response will be anger and shame. So, we want our young people to contact a responsible adult, us, if something is wrong. Save the shaming and the anger for later, but the main thing is safety and getting help. All right. So that's a good one. We talked about creating a code word. That's a good one. Um, a simple phrase can signal that you need help without being obvious in cases where it's a safety matter. So creating a code word. Protect your digital boundaries. No password sharing. No pressured photos. No secret accounts controlled by someone else. That's a good advice too, right? All right. And then belief patterns. One incident may require a conversation, repeated disrespect, humiliation, threat, coercion, physical aggression. So that is definitely key. We definitely want to believe our young people when they come to us with these things. All right. And then just to reframe, the name of our episode is Choose your circle carefully. A friend would never. And we're talking about some recent news stories that have centered around friendships in light of the new school year approaching us and for fall 2026, as we wish our good people, our young people, good luck with their school year. We did want to have this conversation about friendships and relationships and things that they should be aware of as they plan to have a great and prosperous, hopefully, school year, right? So, just some things we want to be mindful of. So, let's get to our call to action and we can wrap it on up. All right, so our call to action. What um, something to think about. What is a friendship lesson you wish you would have learned earlier? I talked about how I can remember always wanting to feel like I was cool. So people would leave me alone and I wouldn't get joned on and cracked on and ranked on, riding the bus. I can remember trying to get on the bus with my saxophone. I played the saxophone. And, that probably wasn't the cool thing for a girl to do at that time, but that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be like Mo Better Blues with Denzel Washington and Wesley Snipes. I was like, oh, I'm gonna be cool, and play. That's what I wanted in my mind. That's what I wanted to do. So that's another thing. Do what you think is cool. I felt like I was always chasing cool, but what I had to learn is that you have to set your own tone and be your own person, be your own leader. Don't be a follower, right? Okay. So that's the call to action. Lessons that we wished we would have learned earlier. And then what safety rule did your family teach you, or what rule do you wish they had taught you? So these are some things we want to think about with our call to action as we close out. Hit us up and share as we prepare clips to go out on social media. We would love to hear what it was like, what it was like for you in your younger days, in school days coming up. So again, we wish all of our young people well. I'm your host, Jen, and we hope that the conversation has inspired and enlightened you. Please consider sharing it with friends. Our collective awareness and advocacy play a crucial role in creating positive change. And we invite you to stay tuned for more engaging content. And we look forward to continuing these important conversations in the future. So until next time, take care.